How do? Welcome back. Well, today's the day where we're going to do a side-by-side taste test of the original regular Abbot Ale, the one you find in the shops, and my clone, in a sense. It's using the recipe from the 1970s, and I've done actually quite a bit of research into this beer, more than I usually do. And what I found is that they've really significantly changed the recipe over the years. Back in the 1970s, Abbot Ale was a really sought after English bitter. It was very well regarded, and in fact in 1968 it won a National Beer Award. Now the new Abbot Ale that we have today, it's still made by Greene King, and it's still 5%, so it's a nice beer, and in fact it is actually one of my favourites in this style. It doesn't mention anything about being an award winner, and I wonder if that's because they have completely changed the recipe to the point that this is no longer the same beer. So we're going to find out. This is the 1970s recipe, earliest one I could find in a book that I have. And of course this is the modern beer that's available in shops all over the country, wide distribution, and also in the Wetherspoons pub chain. They have Abbot Ale on cask. So I'm going to open them, slightly dirty glasses, you'll have to excuse me, but I'll pour them and we'll see how they look, how they smell, the aroma, and of course how they taste. So let me pour the original. Oh, I say the original, I mean the regular, the one that you find in the pubs. Already I can smell those roasted caramel malts. Oh yeah, it is one of my favourites, go-tos if I just want a no-nonsense English bitter. And let's try and pour my 1970s recipe. Again, I'm getting a really nice roasted malt flavour there. Aroma, sorry. Mine's a bit more carbonated, I would think. So let's have a look, first of all. Well, I'm not too far off, you know, when it comes to the colour. Mine is a little bit more red. Now, in the recipe it said to use crystal malts, which I have done, and also roasted malts, but it didn't mention what type of roasted malts. Is it like dark roasted malts? It didn't say, just said roasted malts. So I found double roasted crystal, and I've used that in place of the what they just said, roasted malts, and it is a little bit more red. Mind you, mine is quite opaque. It hasn't actually cleared yet. It's had about 2 weeks in the bottle. Yeah, about 10 days in the bottle, and it's been out here now for about a week. So, but it's still not clear yet. But I don't think actually once it is cleared, I don't think I'm actually that far away, to be honest. If anything, a little bit on the darker side. Well, my head is certainly sticking around, and this head has already started to vanish. Just a little cap now on the top. Mine is a thick, creamy, off-white head. This seems to be more of a stark white, or much more, yeah, like a much more pure white, stark white head. A little bit beigey, but mine is definitely off-white. So appearance wise, I actually prefer mine, to be honest. Just simply because of that head. It seems to be sticking around very well. Right, aroma. Very similar, to be honest. Very malty. Sweet. caramel. This is a little bit citrusy. I'm not getting as much hop in the aroma with this one, but that's okay. This isn't really a side-by-side clone taste test. This is a 1970s recipe compared to the modern day version. This is a little bit more sweeter, and there's not as much hop in the aroma. This has a nice crystal and a little bit of citrusy hop. Right, so there's differences there in the aroma. I'm going to try the original first, or the regular one that we get today, and we'll give them a taste. Yeah, I like this. Roasted malts, almost like a little tobacco-y flavour. The hop, though it was present on the nose, is not really coming through in the flavour. It is mostly malt. A really nice caramel malt with some roasty, toasty flavours, a little bit of tobacco, and then just a hint of bitterness at the back end to sort of balance things out. And it finishes, it's not exactly dry, but it's leaning towards a dry finish. It's a medium mouthfeel, I would say light to medium, but leaning towards medium. Yeah, little malt to hop to actually speak about, really. Okay, let's try mine. You've got the caramel. You've got a nice roasty toastiness. There's not the tobacco there, but you do get hop and you do get bitterness. Now, with bitterness, I had to sort of like play around. The book, Brewing Beers Like Those You Buy, did describe Abbot Ale, and this was written, don't forget, in 1979. It described Abbot Ale as being a very hoppy beer. Now, I'm tasting it now, and it's not a very hoppy beer. So I had to sort of like take an educated guess, because the book itself, if you look at the recipe, calls for 100 grams of bittering hop. I forgot exactly which hop we used in this. 100 grams. And I did, like I was saying, I was doing my research, and I think the reason is, what I've learnt is that back in the 1970s and 80s, ingredients available for home brewers were not great. In fact, the hops were pretty much stale by the time they got to the home brew shops, and so you had to overcompensate in weight to make up for the fact that you had an inferior product. Now, of course, today we can get commercial quality products, so you don't need your 100 grams. I strove for 30 IBU because it said it had nice hoppiness and bitterness to it, so I've gone for 30 IBUs, but it's just my sort of guess, you know, pulling IBUs out of the thin air basically. I don't know what the original IBUs were for Abbot Ale, so I've just gone for 30, and there is a definite nice bitterness to this. The hops are quite spicy, a little bit earthy, a little bit there's a bit of maybe floraliness in there. in a sense, these are two completely different beers. So whilst I was doing my research, I also came across a forum, and this forum was from about 15 years ago, in the early days of the internet, where people actually typed in forums and talked to one another. And there was one guy who was answering another person who was talking about this recipe. And he said that Abbot Ale back in the 70s and 80s was his favourite beer. And he started brewing in the 1980s, and he bought that book. And he brewed the Abbot Ale. And he said it was remarkably close to the beers that he was drinking back then in the 70s or 80s. So I have had to take a little bit of artistic license with IBUs and using the double roasted crystal, which may not have been what was intended. But if we can say that this is close or leaning towards, it's pointing in the right direction to that early Abbot Ale that won the award in 1968, then what we can also say is this is a completely different beer. The only thing they have in common is a nice crystal malt flavour, that toffiness, that carameliness. But in other respects, they're completely different. Which is fair play to Greene King, because they call it Abbot Ale, and it is sort of like the continuation of that original beer. Over the years they've just tweaked and tweaked and tweaked, but they've tweaked it so much it's now completely different. So hats off to Greene King, they now no longer put on their bottle that this is an award-winning beer, whereas if they wanted to be cheeky they could have done. They could have put on 1968 award winner Abbot Ale, but they haven't. And so credit where credit's due. I think they've realised that they've played with this beer so much now that it's become completely different. Now, how different is it? Well, like I say, it's completely different, but basically what it used to be, in my opinion, if this is anything like the original, it used to be a much more complex beer. There was more there was some hop in there was more bitterness. It was just a more complex beer, more flavours, more layers. This is pretty standard. It's quite what you would call a generic English pub ale, English pale ale. And I think it's Greene King that also do Ruddles County. Now, Ruddles County, I drank a pint of that, I remember, in the late 80s, early 90s, and I really enjoyed it. But it was quite hard to come by, as was Abbot Ale. Recently, I think it was just about 6 months ago, I saw a 4-pack in my supermarket, Ruddles County Ale, and I thought, wow, I haven't had that for years. And I bought some, and it wasn't the same beer. It was more like this. And I just wonder if it's because of, they've become a big brewery now, mass distribution, which they didn't have. Abbot Ale was very hard to come by where I live in the northwest of England back in the 80s, 90s. People used to actually try and seek it out. They used to, when they went on holidays, they used to purposely try and find Abbot Ale. It was that well regarded back in the 70s, 80s. But I think with the mass production, the mass distribution that they now have, it's in all the supermarket shops. And also, like I said, I think it was in the 1980s, Wetherspoons, the biggest pub chain in the UK, they started to buy it and serve it on cask. That's the traditional cask. And I just think they thought, now it's a nationwide beer, try and make it more a beer for everybody. And so they've turned what was a really complex, beautiful beer, lots of different layers, into something that's actually quite generic, and like a Ruddles County, those type of beers, just very nice beers, but just generic. I don't know, that's just my surmising, but it would explain it, because these are two completely different beers. This has more layers to it. There's some hoppiness there, the spiciness, a little bit of citrusiness, nice bitterness, which could be me, and a really nice roasty, caramelly malt. Whereas this is really just about malt. It's just a toffee, some toastiness, a little bit of tobacco, a little bit of bitterness, and that's about it. Even though the aroma does smell hoppy, it doesn't come through in the aroma, in the flavour. So basically, they didn't use flavour hops. They just used, you know, whirlpool hops just to get the aroma, and finished. So there you go. It's not exactly a side by side. It's not a clone beer. This is the 1970s recipe. This is the modern day supermarket bought Abbot Ale. But it's a completely different beer from what it used to be, and in my opinion, it's a very generic English pub type beer. I wish they'd have stayed with the original, to be honest, because for me it's much more interesting to drink. So I'm going to finish off today with this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye for now.